Everybody, it's Georgia Weidman, author of Penetration Testing, a hands-on introduction to hacking, and your instructor for this accompanying lab. So today we're going to look at another example of exploitation on web applications. And so, the usual, start up your lab, grab your lab manual. It does say that we do have PHPMyAdmin credentials of root and no password. A lot of things like XAMPP or LAMPed or WAMPed or, your usual, install this thing and now you've got everything. You've got your database, you've got your PHP, you've got your web server. A lot of those, especially in the past, have had a problem of having default credentials for PHPMyAdmin, or they've had no credentials at all. So this is definitely something, worth looking into on your targets. So anyway, let's have a look-see. And so, as usual, what's my IP address? Yours is going to be different. And the target will be .3. So as usual, let's nmap this guy. Oops, that's me. I want the target. Looks like we've just got HTTP. Well, since this is the web app testing section, that is not entirely surprising. And so I mentioned in a previous video that, finding things that are perhaps not at the base URL. So really, I can't paste into here. So if I paste in just our IP address, it just says, welcome to a dive. Congratulations, your application is running. So, it's a dive. It looks like it runs PHP. It does have a dive framework version, which, based on what we've done so far, looking for vulnerabilities in that would probably be a good idea. But, this exercise is called PHPMyAdmin for a reason, so that's kind of what we're after. But we don't see PHPMyAdmin here. This is just like a, you installed this, welcome page. So I mentioned in a previous video that to find URLs that are, not necessarily the easiest to find, much like password cracking, which we will look at in a few exercises, you can basically do the same thing with URLs. Give tools like, we're going to use Dirbuster. You can give these tools a word list and they will basically try all the URLs in the word list and see whether they get, something like 200 OK that says it's there, or 404 not found, it's not there, to see if it can find valid URLs on a web server. So there is a graphical version of Dirbuster. So we did DERB for the command line version, but if you type out Dirbuster, it will actually pull up the graphical version, which it does the same thing. You give it, we use the default word list, but you can give it, different word lists. There are word lists in Kali. So if we go back and go to user, share, and then if we actually go to Dirbuster itself, it has some built-in word lists in it. Word lists. So you could, select one of those and go for it. But it does the same thing as the command line version. So let's be cool and use the command line. So, very quickly it did find that PHPMyAdmin does exist on this system. Like I said, a lot of things like XAMPP, LAMPed, WAMPed, all of those typically install something like this. So it's basically a front end to talk to database. But something you might see is you'll see that MySQL is running, but it'll say, when you do the version scan, it'll say unauthorized, and that just means often by default it's set up so that yes, it's running on the port, but you can't log into it unless you're on the local host. It'll only take logins from localhost, probably for security reasons. But then at the same time, a lot of these will have PHPMyAdmin available to the world, and that'll kind of give you a backdoor into the database, if you will. So, let's browse to it. PHPMyAdmin. And it does have a login on this one. Again, you may find default credentials on older versions. You may find no login at all. It really just depends on, the security configuration of, the person who set it up and the security configuration of, the default of the package. Certainly a lot of these things are doing a lot better. I think security is certainly becoming more interesting to a lot of people. But anyway, if we look back to our main page, it does say, it's root with no password. And, Firefox is telling me, hey, this is like you're logging in insecurely because we're at HTTP, not HTTPS. So that would definitely be a finding as well. Definitely, we don't want anything that people are logging into. We looked briefly at capturing traffic, and we did one almost exactly like this. In fact, that we were sending credentials over HTTP, and anybody that was able to capture that traffic would be able to see it in plain text just in the HTTP request. But anyway, let's log in. All right, so we've got, like I said, basically it's a front end for the database. And I mean, in this case, the database isn't even listening on a port anyway, so there was no way we could get to it otherwise. But, we can now that we've logged in with our default, or at the very least, really terrible, easy to guess credentials, we can now actually run SQL statements on this backend database. Databases are fun because they often run with really high privileges, and you can do all sorts of things. If you're a database guru, your solution to this would probably be way better than mine. I will admit that when I had to take databases, I mostly slept through it. That's not true. I didn't actually sleep. But anyway, so I'm going to write a really, really simple SQL statement. It is in your user manual as well as if you do have the book. This is the exact same SQL statement that we use in the book for this sort of exercise. So, I realize the type is going to be really small. Yeah, so we're just going to run, SQL. So we're going to select, but instead of actually selecting something from a database, we're going to select some text into a file. So we know this thing runs PHP, it says .php here. This is PHPMyAdmin. Obviously this web server knows how to speak PHP. So we're going to write a really, really, really simple PHP script. So we just basically open PHP, and then we're going to run system, and system commands are scary. This is sort of stuff they tell you not to do when you write PHP, because when we pass user input to a system command, that often leads to command injection. But since we're basically writing a backdoor, I think we're good on the command injection sort of stuff. But, kind of do as I say, not as I do in terms of security. So basically we're running system. What all that does is run, whatever is in there as a system command. So what we want to actually do is grab the parameter. Oh, I have the caps lock on. New lows in terms of typing here. So I am actually looking at it over here because it's tiny. And so we're going to get, from the parameter, we're going to get the CMD parameter, and we're going to run it as system. So yeah, it's basically classic command injection. But like I said, who cares? It's a backdoor. We're putting a backdoor on the system. Security has long since ceased to be the point at this juncture. All right. Again, let's not hit the microphone. I realize the text is small. Again, it is in your manual as well as in the book. So this is really just really simple. We're getting a parameter from the URL request called CMD, and we're running it through the system function. So that's just going to run on the underlying system with whatever privileges the web server has. It's going to just run whatever command we give it. And then we actually, since we've just selected this, we want to do into out file. So this is, one of those things they don't necessarily teach you in databases school. So we're going to just put it in a file. So var www html is typically the default location for Apache web servers on Linux. And for a while it was var www. You might have to play around with this to some extent if you're not getting what you want, but var www html is typically a pretty good guess for where things are going to end up. All right, so let's select our really, really simple PHP script into out file. I gotta make sure I close all my like parentheses and stuff, or else, if any of you guys have done SQL, you gotta make sure you close everything. So into the file, and then I need a semicolon at the end because that's just how SQL works. All right, and then I should be able to run this guy. Okay, it returned an empty result, which is fine. I got an error that says no database selected. That shouldn't matter. But now if I go to shell.php, I just get a blank screen. What's cool about this is, like some of the other ones we've looked at, like the web dev, we can, since we've uploaded our shell, we can now call it just from the browser. We don't have to get somebody to call it for us on their end through some sort of social engineering or traffic manipulation. Since we have access to the web server itself and we put something there, we are able to just call it. The reason we're not getting anything here is because of that command parameter. Remember, we were pulling from the GET request. So every time I call this, that's an HTTP GET request, and it is looking for the CMD parameter. You could name that something else. Just, that's what I used in the book. So that's what we did. So if you don't remember, to make parameters, we do a question mark and we just do like CMD equals who am I, for instance. And I am www-data. That's good. I mean, web servers running as system certainly happens. It's bad. Certainly, like the web user shouldn't be system or root for reasons like this, because, web browsers browse places and web servers, they, are typically available to the world. So, they have a certain like risk profile that say, something running, the Adobe Reader, for instance, doesn't necessarily have. So definitely limiting the privileges there is good. So, we've only got limited access to the system. We're basically a web user, but, we are able to, just, I don't know, do random things on here. So apparently it doesn't know ifconfig. That's awesome. But let's see what it actually says to do in the lab manual. What does it use as the example? Oh, it says get ID, which is exactly what I did. But let's see. What about the flag? There's a flag in this one, so they're typically in temp. So cat temp flag, and I would hope, since we're not in post exploitation yet, where we're actually gonna get from www.data or another unprivileged user all the way to a higher privileged user. Hopefully, I mean, pretty much everybody has access to temp, so we should be okay. Yeah, so that should be your flag. And, I think all the flags are in temp. I could be wrong. You can also use the find command. If you're not sure where the flag is, you can use find and find starting at root and name and flag. What? Okay, there we go. Yeah, it says it found. So basically I'm just searching for files that have the name flag in them. So you can do that if they're not in temp, especially on the Windows ones. They seem to move. So, that's just, me following the lab manual and knowing how we built this, that I think they're all in temp. Plus, since we're www.data, there's only so many places we actually have access to at this point. Anyway, so, the main thing here is there was a hidden directory, hidden, that we were able to use basically exactly like a password cracker. It just tries everything in its word list to see if it can find it. It found PHPMyAdmin pretty quickly. Those ones that come up a lot are going to be in pretty much any decent word list. And then from there, we were able to use PHPMyAdmin. It did have bad credentials. Think of them as default or terrible credentials. And from there, we were able to run SQL statements, which, you might have to Google your SQL if you don't spend a lot of time with databases, but that's why Google is grand. I gave you a really, really simple PHP script. We used SQL to upload that to the web server, which we were then able to access. And then we were able to use that script to do some basic commands on here, and we're able to get our flag. So that's all for this time, and I'll see you next time.